Before we move into the 12 archetypes, I wanted to give you a little history of astrology in the health and wellness field. And I ran across a YouTube video by Lee Lehman. Some of you may know her as an astrologer, Lehman. She did a lecture at Kepler College on, and one little segment of it was the history of astrology in medicine. And so I just kind of took some notes from it, and I just thought I'd share in case anybody's interested. Basically, medical astrology had a couple of different methods that were historically used back in the Renaissance days of Hippocratic medicine that flourished back in those 1500s, 1600s, etc. But medical schools developed in the 12th century out of the university systems that were starting up in Europe. And there are the different ways that medical astrology used astrology. They were kind of like one and the same back in the early days when medical schools were developed in the 12th century. Astrology was just a natural part of it. It was medical astrology. And so they used to use decumbiture charts, which is D-E-C-U-M-B-I-T-U-R-E. D-E-C-U-M-B-I-T-U-R-E. Decumbiture charts. And it was like an electional chart. It was a chart that was set up at the onset of a disease. And they would use that chart to discover what they needed to know about the disease. When medical schools first developed, they would also use mundane astrology to predict epidemics. Okay, and remember, back in those days, there was no Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Saturn was the edge of the solar system, or the edge of what you could see with the naked eye. They also then started using natal astrology for the individual charts, and they would have various calculations for determining life force and vitality from the natal chart. They would use that natal chart to predict times of danger for the physical body. They would create calculations of what they would call complexion or temperament based upon that natal chart. So then they could tell what to use for treatments for the individual. And they would elect times, electional astrology, to have like medical procedures and treatments.
That would also relate to the body humors, right? Like the sanguine, the melancholic.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Medieval astrology is so fabulous with that.
Yep. Yep. And they also would use it as a system for classifying herbs and other medicines, based upon the natal chart and who would do good with what. And so, and here's a very unique thing, okay? In the Roman times, and this existed for a long time, this didn't break down until the 17th century. In the Roman times, they developed the idea which was called contract for a cure. In other words, your physicians in those early times, were not always astrologers, but many times they had a background in astrology. And the contract for a cure, the rule was is you didn't pay until you were well.
Oh, wow.
Contract for a cure. And every university, their medical school, a portion of their faculty served as a civil court for when somebody didn't want to pay or they didn't feel that there was a cure. They actually had a civil court system set up that would decide whether or not the contract for a cure was reached, and the person had to divvy up. That fell apart in the 17th century when physicians and lawyers got together. But Lee Lehman spent a little time talking about, and I thought, wow, isn't that fascinating? and she said, basically what it was is, there was an investment to have a cure. So both parties were invested in the wellness search with that.
No more.
No. Mm-mm. And so Hippocratic or Galenic-based astromedicine hung out in France up until the 19th century. And astrology-based medicine didn't break down until the germ-based medicine came along in the 19th century with Pasteur and Koch, who set up the germ-based medicines. Not the Koch of the Koch house system, a different Koch. So I just thought there were some nice little tidbits in the history of astrology in medicine.
So,
Yes, Maureen?
so allopathic medicine started in the 19th century.
Yes. Yeah. Your allopathic medicines really started coming along when they discovered germs. And do you guys know the famous quote from Louis Pasteur on his deathbed? It's the soil, not the seed. The fear base around germs, and especially if you look at it in our modern world, you got to avoid these germs. It's not the germ, it's the environment. And when you have a sick environment in the body, the germs take a hold. And there's even some new theories coming out that the germs can develop in the sick body. But when you have a healthy body or healthy soil, the germs can't take a hold. So that was the famous Louis Pasteur quote on his deathbed. It's the soil, the environment, not the seed, the germ. It's the soil, not the seed. Which is a very, important observation, and he was like, didn't want to go out without being able to tell everybody, hey, hey, hey. So, yeah. And what happened then, in that, what was it, the 16th, 17th centuries, they used to do the bloodletting, they used to do the leeches, they used to do all that stuff. That stuff all broke down, but nothing replaced it until germ medicine came along. And so astrology still worked through a lot of that time period and then fell out of fashion. If you look at some of the astronomers, many of your astronomers did astrology on the side for income. What's his name? Kepler. He was an astrologer on the side. And so that, didn't fall out of fashion either until the fall of the Renaissance, which started coming along in the 1700s. Now, in regards to astrologically based medicine, if you go over to the Islamic countries, it's never fallen out of fashion. If you go over to Hindu, you go over to the East, it's never fallen out of fashion. It's just those of us in the West that got caught up in the allopathic world. Alrighty, so now, as we move into the 12 archetypes, one of the things that I went through and did is I looked through some of my notes from Jeffrey's publications, and he wrote quite distinctly with Pluto through the 12 signs and houses, Uranus through the 12 signs and houses, and Saturn. So if you go into your next section now on the 12 archetypes, I came across somewhere in the notes where Jeffrey said that the inconjunct, the 150-degree mark, and I will also relate this to the 210-degree mark, the waxing inconjunct and the waning inconjunct, both sides of it. Jeffrey says that the inconjuncts will typically bring on a health crisis. They can be a very common time period to have some type of manifestation of health crises. Another comment that I found, I don't know a lot about Chiron in health and wellness, but another general comment is, and when Verdelus and I were talking about this, we expanded upon it a little bit. I've read that your Chiron return, which comes along anywhere from 49, 50, 51, your Chiron return can be a time period to see a manifestation of latent health imbalances coming forth into manifestation. If I say that right, you know what I mean? And so when I told Verdelus this comment, he says, well, what about the Chiron opposition, which comes around that 24, 25, 26 year time period? So you can also possibly look at that as an indicator. But, you know, Chiron, again, is the wounded healer. So I'm, you know, and Chiron in our charts represents where each of us has to look at our wounds and has to look at our own self-healing responsibility in healing. And so Chiron will show not only the wounds, but also some of the healing opportunities. And we'll tend to think of Chiron more as those emotional, mental, spiritual wounds, perhaps, and perhaps in that mental area. But I think that it probably has as much to do in that physical area. I've not studied it or read up on it very much. I just offer my little tidbits and say it's an area of exploration that could possibly be very helpful for people. There's a couple of real good Chiron books out there. Somebody may know more than me.
Kim Marie, when you were talking about the 150 and the 270 degree,
210.
210, okay. What planet were you talking about, or was it all?
Any planets.
Oh,
Any
okay.
planets. Well, for instance, you could go, you know, Mercury, which will rule the left brain, co-rulership of the nervous system with Uranus, and let's just put Pluto, you know, and Pluto comes along and makes 150 degree to natal Mercury. Then that aspect of 150 degrees could create health crises wherever Pluto and Mercury have rulerships by house and sign.
Oh,
Okay, that's the tail end of the week when we start trying to get all this together. Okay, all right. So it would depend upon the planets involved and their houses and signs. But it's the 150 degree, which is the waxing inconjunct, and for me, the 210 degree, which is the waning inconjunct. The waxing inconjunct is known as the Virgo aspect, health crises. And the waning inconjunct is that Scorpio, 0 degree Scorpio mark in the natural zodiac, which is the outer crises. And that can be some manifestations as well, looking at it that way. And so, just a couple of generic tidbits that I wanted to share. So now as we're going to move into these 12 archetypes, the reason that I kind of put together this hodgepodge the way that I have, with Jeffrey having his notes on Pluto and Uranus and Saturn, and I put them together under Aries/first house/Mars, what we can kind of work with in gathering is, you know, from basic principles of evolutionary astrology that signs and houses are very interchangeable, and that the planet will then relate. In other words, in astrology, we will have an archetype that has multiple meanings, that has a spectrum of experience from distortion to natural expression. And so we will use the whole archetype of signs and houses interchangeably. And you can use that interchangeably with the planet as well. Anybody who's studying the 12 archetypes can really, you know, then start to learn the basics of astrology from those 12 archetypes. Go.
Kim Marie, this is kind of a remedial question, but I really would like you to answer it. And I've had a conflict about, I mean, Stephen Forrest talks about You are the plan. You do the houses. You are your planet. And for some reason, I found that not to be true.
You are your sign.
You are your sign, and you do your houses. So, say you are whatever. I got Pluto and Virgo in the 8th house. So I am a Pluto and Virgo, but
Okay,
I do
got
Pluto
it.
and Scorpio. And
I got it.
That hasn't rung true to me.
No.
So
And
could you elaborate on that?
okay, and from the Jeffrey Wolf Green method, how we have looked at it is the sign in the house. You know, if you look at Aries in the first house, the archetypal meaning of Aries and the archetypical meaning of the first house are the same. And there's always a twosome combination of a sign and a house. And when you start to work with interpretation, you start with the house first, and then you add the sign onto it. Okay? And so, for instance, we have a planet in, let's just say, the 4th house. So you start with all of those 4th house interpretations, which are similar to Cancer, which is the emotional self-reliance, you know, the emotional body, the home and the family, all of that inner emotional archetype. Okay? So when you have that planet in the 4th house, then let's just say that it's in Sag. So then you add Sag onto that 4th house. Okay? So this would be someone who would be more freedom-based in all of those emotions. They wouldn't be as clingy as the others. You know, and again, this is just generalization. But for me, it made sense to start with the house and add on the sign. And when you look at Aries first, that is the same archetype. Taurus second, same archetype. When you look at that Aries and first house and the same archetype, you can relate it to Mars, being very similar archetypes. And that's just a way of being able to, I mean, again, as we said earlier, 10 planets at this point. I haven't added Eris in yet, but 10 planets, 12 signs, 12 houses. It can get very complicated. So that's why Jeffrey would always say you break it down to those 12 archetypes, and I agree. You learn those 12 archetypes, and then you can extrapolate. Then you can start going from there. Currently, we have 2 planets that have double sign rulerships, Venus and Mercury. Verdeluz?
That's my question.
Venus, the inner Venus is Taurus, the outer Venus is Libra. The inner Mercury is Virgo, the outer Mercury is Gemini.
Something I've been really challenged by lately is rulership, because on a logical level, I understand traditional rulerships, and it's very logically based as you move out from Sun and Cancer and Sun and Leo and Moon Cancer and keep extending out 2 signs or two signs for each planet. But when you start to bring in the modern and to say that the transpersonal planets are modern rulers, if you're going to do that, then the logic would be that there would be 12 planets, 12 heavenly bodies, and 12 signs. And if that's the case, then something has to be changed. And so in the evolutionary model, I have a real struggle with having Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune be thrown up there with, you know, Neptune, with Pisces and Aquarius and Scorpio, but then you still have these other 2. And so I just have some issues around it, and it's something that is probably never going to be resolved. But in one model that one of my teachers, Kelly Phipps, uses, he assigns Ceres to Taurus and Chiron to Virgo. And in this, you balance this out, and it makes 12 to 12. And when you look at Ceres being the same size as Pluto, and that archetype being something that is enmeshed with Pluto in the myth, I think it's something that, as this model evolves, it's going to have to start to take into consideration.
Totally. And where's Eris go? I agree. I mean, I hear what you're saying. And so you look at it.
Yeah, there's Sedna, and you can go into all that.
Right.
But when you're talking archetypally, you know, it doesn't seem like Eris as a story and as a myth and as an archetype is anything close to something like Ceres. And when you look at the size of Ceres and how everything was actually the other asteroids were like part of this being of a planet that got kind of broken up, and the archetype of the mother
Yeah.
being broken up over history. It starts to kind of make sense.
Yeah, yeah. I've played with this series with Virgo as well.
Virgo,
Yeah.
not with Taurus.
No, I played with. To me, it was Chiron Virgo, and no, wait a minute. I go back and forth. I've went back and forth with them, and for me, so far, the dual rulership with Mercury and Venus is working. You know, and especially when you start grounding in this stuff. However, the name of this astrology is evolutionary astrology. So I mean, it's so right. It will evolve, and how's it going to evolve? And my mind has kind of thought about this too. You know, as we've had Eris come in, as we've had this reclassification come in. How's it all going to turn out? I don't know. It's probably going to be future generations of astrologers that are going to figure it out and discern where they think rulerships are going to go.
It makes it really hard in interpretation, because if you're doing traditional classical plus the modern, I mean, it's just a lot of layers to look at.
Well,
And so,
astrology is a subject you can get yourself confused over in
Oh, yeah.
many different areas.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at how Jeffrey has written about Mercury and Venus, you can discern them with the rulerships there, and they work. You know, it'll work. And again, it may not work for the next 500 years, but it'll work for, I mean, to me it works, and I've been able to find the meanings of them, especially that inner outer Venus, you know, to Taurus, Libra. That works very well for me to recognize the inner Venus, which is the survival, and then the outer Venus, which is relationships. You know, that I've been able, you know, for me it works. And I'm not saying that, I don't think any of us, any astrologers, under any methods, can claim to be perfect or the expert. You know, and anybody who goes in that direction, you know, what did Jeffrey always used to say? The axe always falls on the tallest tree. You know, others have said it too.
Well,
So-
also, you know, Karen, I'm sorry for interrupting, but to me, it's multiple. It's always multiple. So, for me, I look at Chiron with Sagittarius, because that is such a beautiful archetype with Sagittarius and the wounded healer. And it's multiple. I mean, I bring in so many different mythologies with the planets. I wish I could say the idea of one-to-one relationship seems logical, but I don't think that's truth. To me, it's multiple. They all affect.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it, at least.
Yeah.
And it changes.
Yeah.
which is why many traditional astrologers do what they do and just say, you guys.
Yeah, which is why why we have, what do they call them, the Hellenistic astrologers that, you know, don't even, or your Vedic astrologers that don't even consider Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So, just as human beings are evolving, I think astrology is going to keep evolving too, to go with it. Yeah. Nice discussion, nice comments though. Someone else wants, Maureen?
Yes, I don't understand what you mean by inner and outer planets. Can you give example?
It's not an inner or outer, inner and outer planets.
When you said inner Venus and outer Venus.
It's just that Venus, as it's in evolutionary astrology with its current rulership of 2 signs, okay? Venus's rulership of Taurus is more the inner side of Venus, our inner relationship to ourself. All right? And that inner relationship to ourself includes the ability to survive, the essential needs we think we need for survival. And then the Venus's rulership of Taurus is the outer side of Venus. That's relationship outside of self. Libra. Excuse me. Venus's relationship of Libra. That's the outer relationships.
Others.
Others. Yeah, thank you, honey.
And I just go back to where everybody's talking about which is right and which is wrong. And my belief system is that astrologers and other people are given gifts, tarot readers, and they're giving the tools to do what they need to do. So I can read my astrology charts in one um, house system, and you read yours in another house system, but we're going to come up with the same
Yep.
answer because it's my tools versus your tools.
Yep.
And so when these astrologers get into arguments over this, it's like, this is ridiculous. You're wasting all this time.
It's it's like the many religions trying to get to the same
Well,
place.
Right. They're all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
There is no right or wrong religion.
Yeah.
It's just the one, if you believe in it, it's true for you.
Yes.
But it's not necessarily true for your next door neighbor. So.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, that's
Yeah.
my take on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, Miss Marine again.
Pam, could you also do the same examples for the other ones with
Mercury?
two rulers, Mercury and I think Mars?
No, just Mercury. Mercury with its rulership of Gemini is more the outer Mercury that's just interested in collecting facts, names, labels, classifications. Mercury with its rulership of Virgo is the inner part of Mercury, which then analyzes and tries to make sense, adjust, perfect, refine. Those are all inner processes that Mercury does. Yin. Well, they're both yin. No. I was going to say they both are, yeah.
Gemini's very yang.
So there were no other
No,
planets
it's just,
that have two rulers?
no. Just Mercury and Venus at this point. And again, I am 5 planets in the 9th house, and so I tend, and I have one of those planets is Mars in Libra, another one is Jupiter in Libra, so I can always see 3 sides to every story. So sometimes I have to work to feel, sometimes my Scorpio has to kick in to get to where I'm at, because I can always, I'm always trying to look for the larger picture and hold circle. And so I'm always one, like Sue was saying, different astrological methods work for different people, and we each just gravitate to the method that works best for us. And then,
Just one comment. Like, why are we doing this? So that's what I always come back to, intention. So what are you using your astrology for, right? So I have a very clear idea of why I came to be an astrologer. And so I picked my tool. I'm going to make sure it's sharp, and then I'm going to go and dig my hole.
And plant seeds, perhaps.
Well, and yeah, I better not forget that package of seeds in the house, eh? Thanks, Leroy.
yeah, you know what happens to Taurus if it digs a hole too deep? Scorpio comes along. Oh, good one. Okay, so have we solved the world's problems for the moment? We may not all agree on the same answers, but hey, that's why we're here as human beings. We're all trying to, as I like to say, take the many paths to the same place. And so we're each going to work with what works for each of us. Okay, let's see how we get through these 12 archetypes, okay? All right, and go with that. And so I'm probably I've got 3 sets of notes that I want to refer to back and forth as we go through these. All right, so I also better check time. All right, so Aries, which is going to be interchangeable with the first house, which is also going to be interchangeable with Mars. Okay, the homeopathic cell salt for Aries is number 6, which is Cali-Phos. which is potassium phosphate. You've got that in your notes. All right. Now, according to what we have written by Dr. Carey, Dr. Schussler, obviously this cell salt is supposed to work for headaches. It is supposed to work for nervous system disorders. It's supposed to help working with increasing liveliness. You'll see this in your notes along here. Works with the blood. Mars is the ruler of red blood cells. All right. It can also help with emotional problems, poor memory, you know, the Aries in the moment thing that then goes, what do you mean the next moment? Helps with oxygen in the body. And as I intuited, I would say that because Aries is the first sign, the first house archetype, being the element of fire, being spirit, being so excitable, that this Kelly Foss is just going to, the reason they said nervous system was that it would help calm down some of the excitement when it's too excitable. And that's how I relate to that. In your traditional astrology, and you can refer to this little circle glyph. You can see where Aries would traditionally rule the head. That's where it would get in touch with the whole headache thing. And Aries can also rule, Aries, Mars, the first house, can have the co-rulership of the bones in the head, along with Saturn, which rules all the bones. Okay? Aries first house Mars can have to do with red blood cells. This is one of a main thing for Mars, Aries first house, is the red blood cells versus Venus, which is the white blood cells. And so can you see how with the red blood cells, they naturally have to do with energy, vitality, the ability to get up and go and do something. Aries first house Mars also has to do with the adrenal glands. And so when it comes to men, it's natural for Aries first house and Mars to have some co-rulership of the sperm and quality of the sperm. So you could possibly look for stressful aspects to planets in the first house, planets in Aries, to then start to affect some of these things, affecting red blood cells, affecting some of this quality of sperm. Another thing that goes with Aries first house and Mars is the muscles. Muscles, tendons, ligaments, and the quality of all those tissues. And you will find that when you have inflammation of the muscles and the tissues, it can be the buildup of lactic acid in the body. And Jeffrey always used to talk about the remedy of B5 for that, pantothenic acid.
I'm sorry, Kim, what did you say about the lactic acid?
Too much lactic acid in the muscles creates stiffness, soreness, inflammation. And a natural remedy for that is B, vitamin B complex, is B as in boy, B5, which is pantothenic acid. For me, a natural one for that is also the MSM. The other thing with Aries first house and Mars is acidity. So you got a bunch of planets in the first house, you got a bunch of planets in Aries. You can have a lot of acidity in the body, and that you'll have to work with alkalizing. So that acid alkalinity that we talked with yesterday, I lose track of time. That can be related to this Aries Libra, first house, seventh house, Venus, Mars. is Mars can relate to all of this acidity. The other thing you can find with this whole concept of Aries first house in Mars is the mineral iron. Iron necessary for energy. So when you look at somebody who can be very anemic, not have enough iron in their body, you can look to, oh, there's another basic concept that I want to work with that also, backing up here. When we go through these 12 signs and houses, you can sometimes look at the polarity bringing along that manifestation and the squares. Again, as we talked a little bit yesterday, when it starts coming to health and wellness astrology, it's the stressful aspects that have the proclivity to create the imbalances. And the stressful aspects are conjunctions, oppositions, squares, and also the inconjuncts. And I include semi-squares and sesquiquadrates, which is the 45 degree and the 135 degree. If you look at your manual and you go way to the last section and you go through, you open up, this will be page 2, the cycle of phases and aspects. That will show you the semi-squares at 45 degrees and 315 degrees. Last section under charts and miscellaneous. And then the sesquiquadrates is the 135 degree waxing and the 225 degree waning. Those are the marks between each of the 8 distinct phases. Yes, Pam?
Can we do a quick example? Say we've got somebody who's got a heck of a lot of Libran, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they're having blood problems. So that could be about an Aries that's out of imbalance.
It could be the polarity of it. Now here's the remaining part that I wanted to share. Typically, how you can easily see this is conjunctions, opposition, and squares. But what you go to is you go to the causal factor, okay, which is going to be the house or the sign, the area that has the most planetary activity, okay? And if it's in opposition, you're going to have 2 causal factors. If square, 2 causal factors. Okay, you might have multiple factors that are going on. Okay, all right. But yes, you could have a lot of planets in Libra because Venus rules white blood cells. Okay, you could also have that sluggishness and that low energy, you know, coming from this polarity and just coming from the imbalances, you know, of the white blood cells, overproduction of white blood cells when you got a lot of inflammation and sluggishness. And so, yeah, I mean, and, you know, as we look at regular, you know, astrology, to me, as I've been looking at health and wellness astrology, I mean, it makes it even more complicated. It just makes it even more. And so it's always just trying to bring it back and simplify it down. And for me, as I've been working with it, I still come back to I guess I'm an 8th house Pluto. I'm a Scorpio. I've got too much of Pluto in me. And I just still come back and see the effects of Pluto and everything. And so, but that's not to say Saturn doesn't have its part. When you start working with health and wellness astrology, you can have Mercury be just as strong and powerful as Pluto when you start working with the aspects and rulerships and all that stuff. So all the planets are going to have their areas of rulership. All the 12 archetypes are going to have their areas of rulerships. And I guess I would still apply the same principle. I'd look at planets in the houses, you know, first, and then look at the planets in the signs.
Kimberly, sometimes in the work that I've done, I found that it also correlates in terms of, you know, you're mentioning the Pluto influence, but if you're working with somebody in a particular state of consciousness or evolutionary state of consciousness, so their vibrational level will then resonate to, you
Saturn,
know, a
consensus.
Saturn consensus or
Uranus, individuated.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the Pluto people are really people who are, you know, going fast, going far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And Neptune spirituated. So yeah, that's a good point too, to look in those areas as well. Definitely, definitely. One of the other things that I have done as I've been working with it is, and you will notice this also, let me show you this example. When we go into the last section on charts and miscellaneous, and you each go look at your own chart, I've got mine in here, and so I'm just going to, you each have 4 pages for your own chart, okay? And if you go to the 4th page, the last of your 4 pages, you will see where that gives you this aspect grid, which gives you the angular relationship between any 2 planets. Now understand, this doesn't do the 360 degree. Sometimes it's going to be just the opposite. It always gives you the nearest angle that they are separated, all right? But it does give you, by aspect, how close they are on that far left side. You can see, for instance, if you look at my chart, you see I have a semi-square between Mercury and Venus that's only 5 minutes apart. That's my closest aspect. In regards to orb, how tight it is. Sometimes I will go through and just look at major squares, conjunctions, oppositions, and see how many of them are within just a couple of degrees. And so those are really tight aspects, 2 degrees. Yeah, sometimes I'll just go through. And what this listing is that you have on page 4 of your charts, it goes up to 10-degree orb. But sometimes I'll start with those tighter orbs, and I'll just go see what are the tightest aspects that I have that are conjunctions, squares, just whatever intuitively sticks out. And so some of those tightest aspects is going to show you where there is a strong amount of stress or tension when you, say, working with the squares, working with the oppositions. And so then just going in and starting to study those planets, those aspects, and look at those archetypes. And the other thing that I have worked with is repeating themes. I keep coming up to this theme of blood imbalances via various planets and various signs, houses, aspects, or I keep coming up with repeating themes of arthritic imbalances. You can start to see multiple repeating themes. And here is one of the most important things to say. Obviously, if you look at the fact that we all have 12 houses, 12 signs, we all have 10 planets, and we're going to go through all of this, we all don't have every single miasm manifesting. So, in health and wellness astrology, it is very important to do the observation correlation. The last thing you want to do is look at a bunch of planets and signs and houses and start rattling off, well, you got such and such disease and such disease and such disease. That's about doing this, that's doing just like the psychological head trips that you see out there so many times with astrology, and so let's back up and add this in, because this is an important thing. Just because you see the miasm there doesn't mean that there's a manifestation. That's when you can start to then come in and look at trines and sextiles between planets and see areas of strength that might counterbalance that or counteract that stress. And just because, for example, if I may, I'm going to use Leroy as an example. He has Saturn in the 6th house. Anytime you see Saturn in the 6th house, the Virgo house, you think somebody would have to deal with lots of infections, would have lots of colds and flus. He never gets colds. He never gets flus. And if he does, it's a 24-hour thing, and he's through it on the other side. So just because you see a planet in a specific sign and house and you start working with the archetypes, it doesn't mean it's automatically an imbalance. You've got to work with the observation correlation. You've got to have a live interaction with that person. One of our basics with evolutionary astrology is you always must have that interaction with the client to as Chris was saying earlier, see where they're at. This is very true with health and wellness, evolutionary astrology. You've got to have some type of interaction with that client, some type of questions. And so one of the things that I have developed with people is, briefly tell me what's the history in your maternal and paternal sides of your family. Do you have specific imbalances that stick out in the genetics of either side of that family? That right there will then tell you that perhaps this, as you start to see some of these indicators in here, this can be an area of weakness where you may see a greater degree of manifestations because of that family history. Another question that I'm always asking people is, what's your history with diet, exercise, and rest? Are they vegetarian? Are they meat eaters? Do they take supplements? Do they know anything about health and wellness? I mean, those of you coming to a class like this are kind of, probably have a fair amount of interest in healthy foods or supplements, etc. Doesn't take you much conversation with somebody if they start asking you some questions of their own and you recognize they don't take any supplements, or don't know what a carbohydrate is, don't know the difference between the carbohydrates from a vegetable compared to the carbohydrates from potato chips. So you start to take all of the whole diet, exercise, and rest part of it. Kim?
I have kind of a strange question. If you have your 7th house full of some planets, which is in natural opposition to your 1st house, even if they're not in that sign, would that create problems with, like Aries, Mars could be activated
Could be,
to
yes.
cause health issues in the 7th house for those planets?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. And so I also ask people in regards to questions in diet, exercise, and rest, I ask them how active they are. How much exercise do they get? How much cardiovascular activity do they get? What type of rest do they have? And then, I will run into the client every so often that says, I don't want to tell you anything, I just want you to talk and you tell me.
Soothsayer.
And, again, so then I give my famous disclosure, I don't wear the label psychic. I am an astrologer, and evolutionary astrology works on correlation observation. And so perhaps you picked the wrong astrologer. Or I say, well, if that's what you want and you're here to test me, fine, but you're only going to get as good as you get. You're only going to get as good as you're willing to participate. And if you're not willing to participate, you're only going to get half a reading. So, take it from there. And so when it comes to health and wellness astrology, again, one of the important questions that I ask, what has been the history of your manifestation of imbalances? In other words, as you look back over your life, do you have a history of breaking your bones? Tell you right there, Saturn's got something going on. Do you have a history of colds and flus? Do you have a history of stomach problems? Just, and so I ask them, please do a little bit of reflection for me and let me know. And if something pops up with you during the course of the reading, please feel free to share the information or whatever you feel comfortable sharing. Sometimes it takes people a little while into a reading to share a history of sexual abuse, or a history of something else. And so you're always honoring where the client is. You're not trying to, force them to give too much information. There's the extremes either way. And then I ask, included in that question is, do you have any current manifestations of imbalances that you are working your way through, that you are working your way with? Okay, and so from that, that'll give you some idea of which of these miasms are working their way through to some degree of manifestation. You do not want to be the preacher and just starting to project your own stuff into it. You want to do the observation correlation. Bertaluz?
Do you have written down anywhere a series of these questions that you would ask somebody?
I've not written them down. I guess I'm giving them to you in my head so far. Does anybody does anybody else have questions from what I've said? I always ask for maternal and paternal history. I always ask about diet, exercise, and rest. And I always ask about current historical and current manifestations of imbalances. And then the fourth question that pops in that would be equivalent of, do you have any specific areas in health and wellness that you would like to work with? Anybody else? Think of anything else? What else? Bertaluz?
Well, I just think that like something I discovered looking back on some of my major health issues in my life was just looking at the charts of those times. So getting the specific dates for, surgery or an illness or something that was big and life transitional for someone could be really helpful to the astrologer.
That's a good one. That's a good one. And if you want, what we can do is start putting some of this down here. Paternal, maternal history. This is all in regards to, again, imbalances. Okay, and
So really, Kim, we should, if we do decide to use this in our practice, we should really devise a questionnaire.
yes. And that's kind of what I've been in process. And again, Bertaluz just said dates. Very good one, because you can refer back to, okay, transits, progressions, solar arcs. And if you want to, another one you could refer back to is solar returns. You could even include those. It just depends upon how much you want to go into. Sometimes you can do it just with transits. Leroy, you had one?
Well, I just wanted to, I guess throughout this process, not only the details or the specific questions, but always cross-referencing, as we talked about earlier, with the perceived evolutionary state and the, other predispositions a client would come in with.
Yes, your consensus, well, if you work with consensus, these are the people who are going to want you to tell them what to do if they come to you. They're going to be looking for power source outside of self. And so these are the ones who are going to be more inclined. Please give me the magic pill. Your individuated are going to be going back and forth. I'm trying to figure it out. But please tell me what to do. And so evolutionary astrologers, we're always trying to give power back. From my other work, one of the statements that we have a tendency to say is, you know best what's best for you. You always make the best decisions for yourself. I share information, you make your decisions that are best for you. Another way of saying it. Yeah. And those who are spirituated, they'll be very willing to work with the, the deeper aspects of it. But again, all four levels, when I'm working with health and wellness, I'm always trying to work, how do I heal this physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? Remember when we talked about SMEP and PEMS? as I want to call them. I want to get this one down. Current manifestations of imbalances. And for me, diet, exercise, rest. And so for those of you, if you want to work up your questionnaires that you would work with clients, I mean, you could ask them specifics about diet, specifics about exercise, specifics about rest. And a fourth question, asking the client, what do they want to know? And of course, when you ask this is that famous clue. I'm doing pretty good writing uphill. This is the famous question that allows you to then kind of discern evolutionary state. But this is kind of, in the health and wellness area, this is kind of like the environmental conditionings, as I like to call them, that you can gather from them. Anybody else think of any other questions that would work in this area?
History of hospital
I would put that under the personal history of the imbalances.
accidents.
Yes, I would include all of that under here. I mean, and if you worked up your own little chart or your own little questionnaire, you could include that type of stuff in there. Mm-hmm. Under paternal, maternal history, I even ask with grandparents, you know, and usually just basics of, like, let's say we have 3 out of 4 grandparents die of heart disease, and you had a Pluto and Leo generation. That right there, Pluto, Leo ruling the heart, would show you that there could be a susceptibility. When you go through this whole environmental questioning or environmental conditionings questionnaire, again, I still always state to anybody with a health and wellness reading, you know, everything that I'm going to talk to you here about is just possibilities of imbalances or distortions. Please don't take any of this as gospel, you know. And as we're going to spend a lot of time working, part of the reason why I wanted to start with diet, exercise, and rest is as we spend the next few days going into this planet, this sign, this house is this imbalance. That we're looking a lot with the distortions and the imbalances, and so you want to try and work as much time with the solutions, the opportunities for healing, the tools for healing that we know through diet, exercise, and rest. It's the same thing, you know, if you're just going to look at the proclivities for imbalances, it's the same thing as going to an astrologer on a psychological level and all they do is tell you the negatives and what's wrong with yourself, rather than where some of your strengths are. So as you then look at some of these stressful aspects that you see, then you can also then go in and look at some of the sextiles and conjunction, or sextiles and trines. And you can also look at where sometimes the conjunctions as well. You can also look for areas where they have opportunities to create strengths. And you'll see that through the sextiles and trines. You can see it through some of the conjunctions. Okay.
The mantra for Mars is Om Reem Mangala Nama. Om Rim Mangala Nama. Mangala is the name of Mars, so maybe if you want to chant it 3 times, we can all chant it. Om Rim Mangala Nama. Om Rim Mangala Nama. Om Rim Mangala Nama.
Oh, pretty.
So, like in Vedic astrology, it's a big remedial measure to, if you're having a Mars transit, maybe Mars on your ascendant or something, or whatever it might be, that to pray to Mars, and that would be the mantra for that. Very simple mantra. So.
Thank you, honey. All right, Maureen, you are first. You have some questions, honey?
Okay.
Yeah, just leave it there.
Yeah. Um, I was wondering, since if you drink cold liquids, it is not that good for the digestion. Is it more helpful? I mean, I know room temperature is better,
Mm-hmm.
but what about if you have soup or something hot? Is that better, or it does not make a difference?
Intuition tells me that you don't want it too hot. You want it, you can be a little warmer than lukewarm. I mean, when you have things hot, like they say when it's hot out and you're hot, if you drink something hot, it opens up all the pores and cools everything down. But for me, I would say lukewarm to warm, but you don't want it scalding hot. I mean, look at how we lived it in natural law. We didn't have refrigerators in natural law. Everything was the temperature of the climate we lived in. And so I would say you would want to go towards that.
And what kind of fiber is good to take?
For me, the fiber that I like best is fruits and vegetables.
But I mean capsule.
Capsules.
You know, like psyllium or something.
If you're not going to do the fruits and vegetables fiber, the other fiber that's really good is the psyllium seed husks.
Okay.
And if you put psyllium seed husks in a liquid, you want to put it in, mix it up, and drink it immediately. You wait 5 minutes, 2 minutes, you're drinking a gel.
So what about the psyllium capsules?
I really have never worked with the capsules because you're not getting adequate amounts of fiber. So, the average human being, needs to have at least 25, 30 grams of fiber a day, if not double that. We are used to lots and lots of fiber biologically. One of the reasons why I like the supplement MSM is because it will help move the bowels in a natural way. It's a gentle laxative.
So if you get on the MSM program, then you won't need to take any psyllium.
It's going to depend on the individual and how impacted the colon is. But I would go for MSM and increasing fruits and vegetables over necessarily psyllium seed husks.
And one other thing, what about using salt on your food? Is that always bad?
Good one, good one. The average American gets between 5,000 to 10,000 milligrams of salt a day, and the RDA is 2,400 milligrams. So we get almost 4 times as much salt, either 2 to 4 times as much salt as what we need. And so 2,400 milligrams is like a teaspoon and a half of salt. And it's the hidden salts in our foods that are an issue, which means not the salt you sprinkle on a food that you've cooked. It's the salt, it's the sodium that's in all the processed foods we eat. And for those who have high blood pressure, working to lower blood pressure, they say about 1,500 milligrams of salt a day. And it takes some concentrated effort to really decrease your salt intake down to 1,500 milligrams a day.
So how, is that 1 teaspoon or half a teaspoon?
2,400 milligrams is 1 3/5 teaspoons.
Okay.
Okay, so 1,500 milligrams is probably like a teaspoon a
Okay.
day total. I mean, we need some salt. But again, salt is a very inexpensive way to flavor processed foods. And that's why it's such a major additive. Okay, good one. Thank you, honey. Anybody else before we get started? Any other questions? If anything that's popped up so far? Anything nutritionally we didn't? We could spend the whole week on nutrition. I'm just trying to hit some high points that have been meaningful for me. All right, and so back to Mars and Aries and the first house. And so again, I'll just review a little bit. It is the Cali-Phos cell salt, Aries, Mars, first house. If I say one of them, I'm relating to all three, okay? Red blood cells, the muscles, tendons, ligaments. Imbalances will relate to inflammation, the stiff, sore muscles. Mars is also energy, which is why it has a specific rulership of iron. Okay. And let me see if I'm missing anything else. When we have the muscular inflammation, again, it's lactic acid. And what helps is vitamin B5. And when we have muscle circulation, what happens is we close down the circulatory system. So blood circulation slows down. Mars, red blood cells. And when you look at live blood under a microscope, the microscopy, the red blood cells, again, are usually round, uniform, with that little donut indentation, and they're bouncing all around in the blood. They're active, just like you would expect Mars and Aries to be. If you have too much fat in your diet, the wrong kind of fats, the processed fats, if you have various blood issues going on, the red blood cells start to clump together, and they stop moving. They slow down. They become sluggish. They become immobilized. And so, again, there's all kinds of various ways. To me, when you're looking at Mars, Aries, first house, this again is where you can see where cardiovascular activity can be so helpful. When your muscles are stiff and sore, everybody wants to just lay down and become a couch potato. It's actually stretching. It's actually doing the yoga. It's actually getting up and going for the slow, leisurely walk. That will move the circulation in the body and help the red blood cells, become energized again.
Marie, would we
Irving.
also relate? That's okay. Would we also relate the exercise aspect to Aries because it's a fire sign? Are we
Yeah.
assuming that too?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I said that earlier. Yep. Definitely, I would relate that. And again, the human body, we all have Aries in our chart. We all have Mars in the first house in our chart. And so our biological nature, our hereditary nature, is as an active species. We're not meant to be couch potatoes. We are meant to be active. Let me see if I'm missing anything else. Mars can also sometimes, Mars will work with Uranus when it comes to the adrenals, and Mars will rule progesterone in the females. It will rule testosterone in women. It will rule adrenaline in both genders. Adrenaline, you know what I mean? And I'll just check, make sure I'm not forgetting. Yep. Mars will also have, again, some co-rulership with Jupiter and Saturn of the prostate when it comes to men. So if you have heavy first house or Aries influences in a chart, you could look for possibilities of adrenal exhaustion. Stressful Mars in the chart, you can look for the adrenal exhaustion in both genders. Depending upon the gender, you could look for deficiencies in the hormones and the need to balance those out. Any questions? Anybody else thinking?
I didn't get the part where you said imbalances relate to stiff muscles, and then you said lactic acid, but there was something else that I didn't get in there.
One of the ways to calm down excess lactic acid is vitamin B5 and also the supplement MSM, the organic sulfur.
You said red blood cells, muscles, tendons, that imbalances of stiff muscles, lactic acid, and cardiovascular. Was there one more thing that I think I didn't get?
In regard to Mars, rulership of the adrenals. If it's men, it's testosterone. If it's women, if it's men, it's testosterone. If it's females, progesterone.
Yeah, I got that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you'll say it later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not quite knowing what you were meaning in regards to that. With that, and so if you want to, you can glance at the notes that I've put together so far under Aries first house and Mars, and you can see how when Pluto goes in there, you can look again, adrenals, muscles, blood, toxicity. You can start to see Uranus will stress out various areas of the head. You can see where Saturn can show physical trauma to the head. So you can start to see some of the areas. Another thing that can happen, sometimes when you have, here's another one for Aries, in the first house especially, as the first house relates to the ascendant, one of the classic signatures for death, and again, we don't necessarily know whether it is we're talking literal physical death leaving the body or we're talking death and rebirth. But when you have some of those heavy outer planets move across the ascendant, like Pluto across the ascendant, Saturn across the ascendant, going into that first house, there can be, life or death issues. Mm-hmm. And you can't, just because, like for instance, while we've had Pluto in Sag through 1995 through 2008, over that 12, 13-year time period, how many of us counseled people with Sagittarius risings? Not everyone who had Pluto cross that ascendant checked out. They could have had the figurative death and rebirth. And so how I work with that, with counseling people, is, to have them start an inner questioning process. What is it about your life that's no longer working for you? What is it that it's time to naturally release? And what is it about yourself that you keep getting inner messages about wanting to break free, move forward, bust out? And if they can be working with that on an emotional, psychological and spiritual basis, then it doesn't necessarily have to be their physical time to go. One of the things that you look at with some of your more historical astrology, like the Hellenistic astrology and your Vedic astrology, I mean, those who become very proficient at it, you know, what I've heard Jeffrey say is there's usually like 4 or 5 time periods where the soul can check out in a lifetime. And, you know, who of us can play God and say which one it's going to be? But there is a classic one when you have some heavy hitters crossing over that ascendant. Or you can even, you know, sometimes see it with the oppositions or the squares to the ascendant. Because that gets in, as we know, the polarity of Libra and the squares from Cancer, Capricorn. And so, again, I'm always counseling people on that emotional, mental, physical to address whatever is needing to death and rebirth. Question, hun?
It was just a comment on that, and I forget who said it, but it may have been Stephen Forrest, but there was a Mars transit to the ascendant related to Ernest Hemingway, and that's when he shot himself. And it was when Mars transited Martin Luther King's ascendant, I think was when I don't know if it was when he gave a speech or he led a big walk or movement, but it's the same transit and a completely different way of dealing with that same energies, because Mars is going to motivate you or irritate you at that extreme level. So I just wanted to mention that in terms of how powerful that cross on the ascendant is.
Yeah, thank you. You know, and the example that it's always going to be relative to the context of the individual soul in question with that. And so again, if you refer to some of these notes, you can see with Uranus having its rulership of the brain. We'll get to that one when we get to the Aquarius 11th house Uranus. But with the traditional rulerships of Aries to Pisces, the head to the feet, you can look at Uranus in that first house or transiting through Aries, and there can be different types of brain injuries, you know, from the physical head injury to the headaches to the brain traumas to the strokes to all kinds of different things that you can start to look at with that Aries first house Mars. And so as you can see, we can come up with some clarity with some of these planets where, you know, we know Mars rules red blood cells. Where in the body do we not have red blood cells? So you can relate to all of these co-rulerships and interrelationships in health and wellness with these different archetypes. And so it's just something that each of us chooses to fine-tune as we deepen our studies and our working with them. I had another one flash through in regards to Mars in the head. Anybody else coming up with anything as we're talking? Anything that you think of in regards to? I mean, another thing that you could look at with Aries first house and Mars is sports injuries because of muscles and their rulership of muscles, inflammation. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I don't know if it was 6 months ago, but Mars exactly conjuncted my Uranus in Cancer, and that was when I fell and broke my nose. I landed face down on a tile floor.
There we go. Mars in Uranus, the head, in her case, the nose, which is part of that head. Ah, yeah. Pardon? Okay. All right. I'll have to look for something else. And so then, of course, whenever we're dealing with the first house, Aries Mars, we can look at imbalances of the red blood cells. Most common one being leukemia, but obviously, which is cancer of the red blood cells, by the way. But there can be many, many different types of imbalances of the red blood cells. All right, tape change for a moment. Going again? Okay, for sake of the tape, yeah, when we start to work with the muscles, the mention of MS imbalances can relate to Mars because they also affect the nerves relationship with the muscles. It's a Uranus-Mars imbalance that we can relate to. In reviewing my notes, another comment that came from some of Jeffrey's notes is when you look at Pluto crossing over that ascendant and moving into the first house, relating so much to that physical body, you can have manifestations of cancer imbalances as well when it goes into that first house. And I would almost think that other planets could be a part of that as well. You have Neptune cross over that first house, and you could have issues with the immune system, Neptune ruling the immune system. There's how you start doing some of all of the combinations with that. And timing of that, timing of the planets as transits, solar arcs, progressions going through various houses, etc., in regards to that. Again, there can be a series of brain imbalances with the rulership of the head. You know, not having the hormones, so the stunted growth can be related to a heavy first house or Aries archetype. The exhaustion, we talked about that. And because of Mars ruling the adrenal glands, the other thing that we can have go on, that adrenal exhaustion can affect the nervous system. Now, the central nervous system is ruled by Uranus. I also put co-rulership to Mercury, and for me, sometimes Jupiter. When we go into the chakras, you will see that the nodal axis relates to the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems. South node, sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. North node, parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. So when you're looking at a heavy Mars, Aries first house and you exhaust the adrenals, that also exhausts the nervous system. And we'll come back to the nervous system when we work with the body systems at the end and go just the opposite. Work with the body and then plug the planets in. So it's like, I thought on this and I thought, how do I talk about one subject? And then I just realized there's no way to talk about one subject. They're so interrelated back and forth. So you just, as I've worked with it, you just start going back and forth with it in multiple ways, and then it starts to eventually make an intuitive right brain sense to you in various ways. Verloos?
Can you just say that again about the north node and the south node and the parasympathetic, sympathetic?
In the chakra rulership system, the south node rules the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. So think about it. Our south node, which is our habitual past, the ego of the past, the mode of operation from the past, that's that part of ourself that, it's habit, it's instinct, fight or flight. And the north node relates to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. That's the part we don't have to think about beating our heart. We don't have to think about digesting our food. If we want to go in that direction and develop a conscious relationship with that north node, we can. Okay? Anybody else? Questions? Anything you can think of in that whole Aries first house Mars? Yeah. So again, you can relate to Mars just being energy. And we can, and so we can relate to that on a psychological level as well. You know, Mars is action, the conscious acting out of our desires, the energy. Stressed out Mars, you got somebody who could have low energy levels, needs to develop better energy. You got somebody with Mars in a grand trine, you know, there's energy between whatever, or wellness or strength between whatever the other two planets are in that grand trine. All right? If we were here for a month, we could go through Mars and all 12 houses and signs and see how that relates. But we're not going to have that much time.
Pretty fun, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Stay
you could
tuned.
just do like almost like a keyword thing for like Mars transiting the houses. Like that's gonna be the area that would be prone to irritation, anger,
Yes.
inflammation.
Yes,
You know,
there you go. Good one.
all of those
Very
things.
good one. Very good one. Mm-hmm.
So if it's going through the fourth, you know, your home is liable to be like a place of battle or confrontation during that time.
Going through the
Irritation.
fourth with Cancer, you'd be looking at, oh, that was the thing I wanted to say, about the digestive issues with the moon ruling the stomach and the containers. You know, and fourth house moon ruling all the containers, Mars transiting through that fourth house, you might want to do a liver cleanse. You might want to do a kidney cleanse. You might, Mars through the second house, Venus ruling kidneys. You might want to do different, you know, types of cleanses. But the other thing about Mars that I forgot to say is Mars and Moon have co-rulership of the primary brain. Remember that? And that's the instinctual brain. Okay? So sometimes if you see a really stressed out Mars or a really stressed out Mars Uranus or a Mars Moon, you could see some issues with the brain stem, the primary brain. Okay? The back of the brain, right here. Consciousness. How many of us, you know, we don't have to, the brain stem, the back of the brain, is what rules a lot of these rest and digest issues. Again, we don't have to remember to take a breath. We don't have to remember to beat the heart. Those areas are ruled by this part of the brain, which is co-ruled by Mars and Moon.
And wouldn't that also be trauma? Because trauma is stored in the primary animal brain, isn't it?
Yes?
So, interesting. Okay.
That would then that, and can you see that with Mars Uranus?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's in. I'm even thinking of my own chart. I don't know
Uranus
about
has
that,
the
but
main
yeah.
rulership of the
But
entire
the
brain.
brain is trauma. Was trauma? Oh, trauma stored.
Mm-hmm.
The reptilian brain. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
It's also where the sexual drive exists. It's back here in the primary brain. So Mars is rulership of that, and the Mars sexual drive. Okay. Any other questions, comments, ideas, possibilities? Okay. If we come up with any more, we'll pop them in. All right, so let's move on to Taurus, second house, Venus, and Verdeluz want to give us the mantra.
The mantra for Venus is Om Rim Shukraya Nama.
Say it again. Say it a couple times first.
Om Rim Shukraya Nama. Shukraya. Shukra is the name of Venus. Shukra. Om Rim Shukraya Nama. Om Rim Shukraya Nama. Om Rim Shukraya Nama.
I like Circes because you like that idea of the rulership of Taurus and Circes. Do you have one for Circes?
Series?
Ceres, yeah. Do you have that? One
No.
for that? No. Not yet.
Because
He's giving the
I'm giving you the Vedic. There was no series or Uranus or
Okay.
Neptune.
All right, so then when we start moving into Venus, Taurus in the second house, the homeopathic cell salt is sodium sulfate, known as nat sulf. It is cell salt number 11. And according to Dr. Dr. Carey and his student, Miss Perry, This cell salt is recommended for very sensitive individuals who have a decreased sense of liveliness. You know how sometimes Taurus I relate this to Taurus just being the couch potato, you know, comfortable in their little frog in the well. This cell salt is found as a component of brain, nerve cells, spinal cord, and blood. Venus has specific rulership of white blood cells. Neptune has co-rulership of white blood cells. So here's Venus and Mars as a planetary pair between red and white blood cells. And we can also work with Nat Sulf for digestive organs. So we start to move into kidneys especially. They recommend some of the liver and pancreatic juices, but it can be constipation, sluggishness, tiredness, and the constipation can also come from that polarity, Pluto ruling Scorpio. This cell salt's also recommended for living in damp conditions such as rheumatism, asthma can benefit from this. Taurus, which with its rulership of throat, tonsils, lower jaw, that can come in. This can be a cell salt that'll work with the soreness in the throat. Remember I said when you have a sore throat, it's the liver that's being activated. So this is possible. My guess is that this oh, here it is in the next one. Nat Sulf works with the liver. Liver, kidneys, with that. The kidneys is known, or excuse me, the skin is known as the third kidney. When your kidneys cannot process toxins through, they'll come out through the skin. So sometimes when there's skin issues, you will look towards the kidneys. I also know the skin as being the largest detoxing organ. Now Saturn has specific rulership of the skin, but Uranus can get involved with the skin. Venus can get involved with the skin through the kidneys. So you can start working with that. They also say Nat Sulf for any swellings in the body. And so Venus has rulership of estrogen in females. Men have estrogen as well. They just don't have as large of secretions of estrogen as women do. Venus also rules cortisone. Venus and Uranus have co-rulership of cortisone. And that will have to do, the adrenals, cortisone comes from the adrenals, adrenaline comes from the adrenals. There's, I think, 3 or 4 things from the adrenals. I'll have to go look those up for you to give you those specifically, but Venus is specifically with cortisone, which will also have to do with energy. I mean, if you look at Venus and Mars, you know, action, reaction, active, passive, you know, they've really got to have a healthy relationship between each other. We see that in creating healthy relationships through EA, but you can then also see that just through the blood of the body. And so Taurus, second house, and Venus can also relate to the blood of the body. It can, Venus ruling the white blood cells. You know, the white blood cells are always going out there trying to get whatever it considers to be toxins in the body. Okay? And Neptune has specific rulership of the immune system, but Venus comes in there and works with the immune system as well, because when the immune system is triggered, those white blood cells that exist everywhere in the body immediately go to that toxin and try and isolate it so that it can be flushed out the kidneys, Venus. I sometimes will think that when you have autoimmune diseases that can start to come in, that Venus can sometimes be involved with that, because what will happen is the immune system turns in on itself, and the white blood cells attack the wrong stuff. They attack ourself, the body, various parts of the body, rather than they're going to see various parts of the body as a toxin. Okay? And so that starts to come in. So you can see where Venus has rulership of the kidneys because, again, the flushing of the toxins work a lot through the kidneys. Venus, remember, Venus rules with the psychology of hearing. So you can sometimes see some of the physical stuff of the ears with Taurus in the second house, as well as Mercury, which is the anatomy of hearing. Okay? Venus rules the sense of smell. So people who have, what's that, can you remember what the word is, Leroy? What's that word when you lose your sense of smell? You remember that? Anemosis or something like that? Nemosis?
Olfactory deprivation?
Yeah. When you have olfactory deprivation, you can many times have Taurus, the second house, or Venus involved because of Venus ruling the sense of smell. I have South Node in Taurus, and I am extremely sensitive to smells. And so I have to be very careful with, when I used to have a very depressed immune system, I used to have to avoid the detergent aisle of grocery stores. I would just have strong reactions. And so then as I really corrected my immune system, strengthened my immune system, now doesn't bother me at all. I can go right through those areas and be just fine, not having to worry about it or anything. The Taurus area can also rule with your traditional astrology as you're working from head to toe. You can find the whole neck and throat area, again, relating to that whole Venus area, in addition to Mercury relating to that area. And so you can relate to, oh, that was the other thing. Venus also relates to, specifically to the veins and the arteries and capillaries with the body. Venus is also specific in Taurus and the second house to your obesity, those senses, the love of the senses, the love of the food, the love of the diet. You can start to look to weight issues with Taurus, second house, and Venus, working with that. So stressful aspects to Venus with some of those things. Let me refer, any questions from anybody? I'm going to work with, Venus has co-rulership of the ovaries with the moon. The ovaries have that secondary function of estrogen and progesterone. Women produce estrogen the first half of their cycle, and estrogen sets up the eggs to fall from the fallopian tubes at ovulation, and then it switches over to progesterone, and progesterone is what lines the uterus so that the fertilized egg can attach to the wall of the uterus and develop and grow in the wall of the uterus. And so if there's no pregnancy when the egg falls, if it's not fertilized, then when the progesterone drops down, that's when women have their menses and bleeding time. And so the estrogen, progesterone just go back and forth in working with that. And remember, that was estrogen Venus, progesterone Mars with women, And so that area goes back and forth. So you can start to look at heavy aspects or harsh aspects to Venus and Mars with other planets, like Saturn is a really good one, or Pluto, to see some issues with female hormonal imbalances, working with that. So then as you start to go through some of these notes, you can see that if you have Pluto in the second house or transiting through the second house, you can start to see some of the issues that we've just been missing, you know, the kidney stones, urinary tract issues, because the urinary tract relates to the kidneys, so that can relate to Venus, second house, Taurus. You can see Uranus being in there, creating stress to the kidneys, also creating kidney stones, kidney headaches. Another source of headaches. You know, headaches are not just related to Mars. You know, headaches can come from dehydration with not always having enough water. You can also have kidney toxicity, and you get what you call the kidney headaches. So flushing the kidneys. So sometimes when you're having some planetary transits through Taurus, Sun in Taurus would be a natural time of the year to do kidney cleanses. Go ahead.
In the way this is structured, like, because Libra is the kidneys, right?
Yes.
So it seems like more specific if we were going like house to house. Because, or sign to sign. Because like the Taurus is not going to be so much the kidney stuff. The Libra is going to be the kidney stuff.
You can find it both. You'll find it both places.
Okay. Just because you're saying because Venus?
Because of Venus. Yeah. When I've looked at some of reviewed some of the notes of Jeffrey's with things that he's said, he has put Taurus and Libra almost identical because of Venus. Same thing with Gemini and Virgo. Yeah. So you can find the kidneys in that second house. You can find the kidney issues in the seventh house. You can find them with Taurus. You can find them with Libra as well.
I was also going to say that Taurus is the shoulders, and
Yep.
that
You
area
get
of
the
the
neck
body.
and shoulders.
Neck
Yep.
and shoulders. So.
Yep. You can work down with that. Yeah. Anybody else? Comments and questions in regards to this? And you can get the lower back from this with the kidneys too, with Venus and second house and Taurus, working through that. Anybody else? Now, sometimes I can see minor differences, and sometimes what you will work with the second house in Taurus is womb issues due to the polarity from Scorpio and the 8th house. So sometimes if you have the Taurus in the second house or a heavy Venus, you can start to get some of the womb issues in there. Venus ruling the estrogen. You can sometimes get those issues even with Mars. I mean, this is the thing. You're not going to find health and wellness astrology to go one size fits all. You can even pick up this person's book, that person's book, and a third person's book, and they all can say similar, yet different little variations of things. And so sometimes, I mean, I think I'll be studying this subject the rest of my life. I like the subject, but there's sometimes where I will get, question marks, where it's like, well, how do they get that one? Where does that one come from? And it took me a while to figure out that they relate that lower back as a reflex action with the kidneys.
Well, and also Taurus is the body, so I think even going back to the kidney thing, Libra, and I would think it'd almost be a symbolic relationship to the kidneys with Libra and a physical manifestation with Taurus, because Libran's so symbolic too, and it's an air sign. So you wonder if it would be a literal relationship. With the kidneys.
Some people relate Aries to the physical body,
Yeah, exactly.
and the first house to the physical body.
It's all of it, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, good luck to the person who can identify this real clear cut.
But that's what we haven't. I mean, that's what intuition. I mean, that's what the intuition is. That's the hard. That's the hard work.
It's just like any of you who practice evolutionary astrology, or if you practice another form of astrology. We were just talking, was it yesterday, you get these are the tools, and you practice those tools, and you become more and more proficient with it. It's the same thing with health and wellness, astrology. You're going to learn to work with these archetypes as how they're going to speak to you. And it might be a different variation than how it speaks to someone else. And you can, still end up in that same place with that. Oh, I know. I can tell you, I mean, literally for me, I can be studying away at something and I'll go, oh God, this is so clear. And then I can be studying away the next thing and I go, well, I don't get this one yet. This one still brings me back to, I'm not quite understanding where this person gets this from, depending upon whose book that I'm reading. It's a vast subject. Vast subject. And so, but part of the reason why I did go through whatever notes I could find with Jeffrey and just try and write, because he had specifically written on Pluto, Uranus, and Saturn, part of the reason why I lined them up over Gemini, third house Mercury, so to speak, or Taurus, second house Venus, was then when you would read, even though you're reading Pluto, Uranus, and Saturn, you can start to get where some of the repeating themes are.
And there's no Neptune.
He's not written on Neptune
So-
or Jupiter. And so some of what I would like to extrapolate this week, if anybody wants to, is let's put Neptune through these houses.
Yeah.
Let's put Jupiter through these houses.
Yeah, I was wondering if the reason that he has Pluto, Uranus, and Saturn only through the houses is because they're the malefics?
No?
No.
If you notice the sources, it's 3 different books. This information is taken from 3 different books. So there wasn't any, this is my combination that I put together from 3 different books written by him.
Kimmery, do you think he talked about those two of the specific planets due to the fact that he did work on trauma based on Uranus and Saturn to the soul?
And Pluto. And Pluto. And it just so happened, you'll see in my parentheses, these planets are also the 3 rulers of the root chakra. And so that was just something that I realized once I kind of copied and pasted all this together with that. So I'm sure there's just as much information that we can put together on Neptune, that we can put together on Jupiter, that we can put together on all the planets. It's going to be an unfolding process as time goes by, But I guess I just have a personal interest in health and wellness, and so for me, moving evolutionary astrology into a synergistic relationship with health and wellness, it's so easy to do on a soul level for many of us, or on a psychological, emotional level. It just seems like this is another logical step to take it into the physical level. And so it's something that I just see the EA community doing over time. Can you reach it?
Yeah, just a comment is that it really speaks to your formula that you introduced yesterday, the SMEP or the PEMS or whatever. And the body, we're here to do the body thing. So if we don't have a good working body, it's going to be hard to extrapolate it into the emotional body, into the mental body, and then hopefully eventually for some of us anyway, into the spiritual body.
Yep. Yep, most
We
definitely.
gotta have a good body.
Yeah, yeah. And when we take these, for instance, these, this Pluto and Virgo generation, who is doing that mental analytical thing, we're starting to take all of this EA work and try and put it into different systems and, job
Good
security.
luck to you.
Yeah, lifelong process, job security. But so I'm not trying to discount anything. I mean, I think eventually, I've thought about this ever since Sedna, who is now Eris, come onto the planet, and discovered in Aries. I mean, there's a whole new body of astrology that has to come out. And Eris has a 500-year cycle around the zodiac. I mean, we've barely started observation correlation, and so I guess my ninth house has just learned anytime I want to call out absolute, I run into a Gemini who says,
Oh yeah,
but. So I'm not discounting the difference between Taurus and Libra. There's probably some distinctions. And we can just try and kind of feel them out, over this week and try and figure it out, where we think it falls with that.
I've heard, do you know Jane Ritter Patrick?
Yes, and I love her book.
Okay.
I really like her book.
Because she did a talk at UAC this
Yes.
year on this, and I listened to it. I have a copy of it. And, so she, in her talk, was going through, she starts by going through the cardinal cross. And so that's, and so she's laying out the organs, the associations by sign, basically. And so that's where I was just getting that from, and that might be like a very succinct way of moving through.
Jane Ritter Patrick, RIDDER dash Patrick, A Handbook of Medical Astrology. I have not read this word for word, but what I've found in this book I've liked, and I have found a lot of similarities to evolutionary astrology. There's been a couple of things that have been different, and I couldn't tell you what they were, but I have found a lot of similarities with a lot of her stuff. And I like some of her explanations about how she gets there. Copyright 1990.
And what's her name?
Jane Ritter Patrick. And she does use a decumbiture chart, which is the chart drawn up for the onset of an imbalance. This is the second edition, published in 2006. She was at UAC and did a workshop at UAC. Yeah, so that might be something, Verdelus went to the workshop, so that might be something that would be worthwhile. I picked her book up there just because of that, because I liked the book. So I would recommend that book for any of you wanting to go forward as health and wellness practitioners. Mm-hmm. And so Taurus in Venus, getting back to it, relating to the senses, it's not just the sense of smell. What are the five senses? Taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing. I have South Node in Taurus, and I have very, very sensitive ears.
Literally?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, very, very, extremely sensitive to cold. I can go hiking in June and July, and if it's windy and cool, like today outside, I can wear earmuffs. I put my hood on when we walked across the parking lot. Mm-hmm. And so that's a lot of that Venus-Taurus part, and probably is in Libra, okay, as well, but it might relate to Taurus and the senses, whereas the kidneys might relate more to Libra than Taurus, but don't think the kidneys are missing from Taurus.
Yeah, I mean,
Could be, yeah,
yeah.
yep, could be that too, but yeah, Venus, Taurus, the second house, very much related to any of the senses. All right, anything else that, oh, and we talked about the veins and the arteries, okay? And so Venus has the rulership of that. And so the hardening of the arteries, for instance, can be a harsh aspect between Venus and the sun. Venus arteries, sun heart. See how you start to put, these together, and it just takes practice and time.